Hi, hello everyone. My name is Ugomila, and I'm incredibly happy that we're gathering today here for the last session of the LinkedIn Live series, where we meet with different stakeholders that can share what it would take for businesses and our economy to decarbonize. I have had the great honor this year to meet a lot of incredible people, and it has always been a good mix of practitioners, people that are on the sustainability side within businesses, but also such that support businesses on the outside, be it consultants or others that develop special materials or special processes that can enable for decarbonization to be achieved. For the final session of the year, I thought that it would be fantastic if we have a bit more of a thought-provoking perspective, which is maybe unusual for the usual net zero discussions within businesses, within our economy. And for this, I invited a good friend of mine and someone that I have a lot of respect for, given the depth of thought and also kind of deep understanding of the challenges that faced by our society and our economy. He spent quite a lot of time thinking about these big topics, and I had the chance to get to know him in a serendipitous manner after having read his book, How Soon Is Now, at the conference. And it felt like I was a bit starstruck because I've always had respect for the content that was within this book and within the other books that I then consecutively read. But didn't think that I would get the chance also to get to know this person. So without further ado, I would love to invite Daniel to join me here on stage. Hi, Daniel.
Hey, how's it going?
Really good, really good. Where do we find you today?
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk to you. I remember when we met and you told me that How Soon Is Now had a big impact on you. I was kind of curious, actually, what it was about that book that you found inspiring.
Yeah, I've actually prepared myself with a little kind of summary of what How Soon Is Now is about. So in a way that it's defined, when you go on some of the bookshops online, it says, we're on the brink of an ecological mega crisis threatening the future on Earth, and our actions over the next few years may well demonstrate and determine the destiny of our descendants. Between a manifesto and a tactical plan of action, How Soon Is Now, by radical futurist and philosopher Daniel Pinchbeck, outlines a vision for mass social movement that will address the crisis. In the context of what I then got exposed to, I must say I had to reread a lot of the chapters because your mind is complex and sometimes the ideas need to be broken down for simpler people like me. But what it really provoked me was that you were speaking about organisms, the structures, like the crowd dynamic, and how do you make changes at large scale, but also connecting it to the business topic. So I was really fascinated, and being able to meet you at this conference in Italy 2 years back was really inspiring. And I hope today we can share a little bit about your ideas with the rest of the world. So maybe just to kick it off, like to ask you, who's Daniel Pinchbeck? What are your focus topics? And you're a writer. What are the topics that fascinate you?
The topics that fascinate change and evolve over time. Right now, I've been less focused on writing books and more focused on writing a newsletter, out of which will come some books or collections of essays or whatever. So that's on Substack. It's danielpinchbeck.substack.com. And it's interesting because I feel that people's attention spans have shifted. People don't, a lot of people don't really read books as much anymore. But I feel like a short essay on a meaty topic is something that people can still get into. And actually, just this weekend, I'm writing about Judaism, kind of Jewish identity. I mean, I'm half Jewish, but I grew up in a very secular way. Just kind of thinking about the power that Jews have in the world, the growth of anti-Semitism around the world, and how Jews can understand it, and what kind of obligations and responsibilities do Jews have in this kind of circumstance.
Fascinating and really important topic of identity. When did the idea about How Soon Is Now came about? Maybe I gave a little bit of an overview about the book, but in your own words, how would you define the content within How Soon Is Now, and what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, it was kind of like a trajectory. Like my first book was on psychedelics. It was called Breaking Open the Head. And when I started writing that book, I guess in my late 20s, I was a skeptic and materialist, but I felt a kind of longing to, see if there was any kind of spiritual reality or any other dimension of consciousness. And I discovered through the process of researching that book that involved going to like Africa, going through tribal initiation ceremonies in Ecuador and Mexico. And so that I felt that there were, I think that shamanism had legitimacy, and that, sort of I was shifted from a Freudian to a Jungian, and got very interested in like esoteric ideas, esoteric cosmologies, occult philosophies. That led me to a second book, 2012, which was looking at prophecies of different indigenous cultures around the world, including the Aztecs and the Maya and the Hopi, and also the ideas of kind of prophetic ideas in the monotheistic religions like Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and also kind of looking at like the ideas from Hinduism or the Yuga cycles and so on. So that was still a very metaphysical book, but I was left after writing that book because there was a lot of ideas around kind of the end of the Mayan long count calendar, 2012, or the time cycles that the Hopis and other people talking about, leading to a new epoch of transformation of consciousness. But then I began to wonder how that would happen in terms of our like systems and structures. So that led me to write How Soon Is Now, which is basically, thinking about, what would happen if we try to redesign in a way our social systems, our technical systems, to reckon with the ecological emergency. Yeah. So for me, it was like a natural next step in my own process in a way to write the book.
My own observations about the topic, after also having delved into a lot of different theories about end of humanity and so on, has been that there is a shift, and that shift doesn't necessarily mean maybe the traditional one where we need to disappear, but at least like a fundamental on this planet. And I truly believe that some of the events of the latest months and years have demonstrated that society is awakening to their responsibility of being part of an ecosystem rather than in charge of it. I would like to dive into like where knowledge actually defined you in your views about what was coming out in How Soon Is Now, because I really respectfully observed in some of the also lectures that you've delivered that I've participated in, how studious you are about showing the different perspectives without immediately jumping into conclusions, but then kind of summing it up in a way that it connects. How did you get to the point of understanding the importance of the climate crisis? Because obviously, I think as much as we could be happy that a lot of people are awakened about the issue, we are still nowhere close to the whole society understanding of the severity ahead of us.
Right, and that's also sort of due to a collusion, let's say, between financial interests like media and fossil fuels and industries that there's many reasons, car companies, many reasons why the popular knowledge around the emergency is not where it needs to be. It's been kind of like shielded from them. As for me, I mean, I had started writing about ecological topics. I wrote a piece for Esquire about why the male sperm count had declined like 50% in like 50 years or 40 years. And I discovered it had to do with like plastics and pesticides, estrogenic hormones, estrogenic chemicals that mimic hormones. And that it was like also leading to like all these cancers, like breast cancers and reproductive cancers. And when I published that piece, I was sort of struck by how people just laughed it off and couldn't take it seriously. And I began to realize there was really a blockage in terms of reckoning with how severe this, what we're doing to ourselves and the planet is. And that was reinforced when I was writing Breaking Open the Head. I visited the Amazon, and we went through these big areas of rainforest which had been logged out, or they'd been polluted by the oil companies. Then mestizos had come and like slashed and burned the trees, and it was like millions and millions of acres were gone. And apparently when something like that happened, it created enough oil, when they found the oil and prospected for it, to keep the US demand going for like 3 days. So we're losing like millions and millions of acres of rainforest to keep the US, system happening for another 3 days. And that's happening all around the world. So I think that for me was a huge aha moment when I realized how kind of like suicidally unsustainable current practices were.
Yeah. The one big issue that I always try to kind of instigate as a discussion with our clients that also include a lot of companies that need to transform quite significantly is the idea that their existence is at threat if they don't take action to decarbonize at scale. So there's today we just heard the news from COP15 that actually there's been a historical deal struck for nature. I don't know if you followed, but it's fantastic news because by 2030, more than a third of the lands on this planet will be protected. And that's the biggest commitment that has ever been made to protect nature. And I think this is a reflection of the fact that we're finally starting to understand that the nature, this holy kind of offer, gift to us that we've not been in any way responsible for in its creation, mainly in its destruction up until now, is essentially, the reason why we're able to create value in the traditional way that we think about value. How do you, when you get into these kinds of discussions, be it with individuals, be it with businesses, how do you explain to someone that it matters to understand nature, it matters to protect nature?
Well, yeah. First of all, I want to say that I commend your optimism. I really enjoy reading your your newsletter, and yeah, I think you're doing great work by kind of seeing the possibility of positive change. I don't know how to answer your question, to be honest. I mean, I don't work in the same way you do. A lot of what I'm doing right now is just writing, so I'm not like interacting. I mean, I wish I was. I wish different businesses were calling me up and inviting me to give a talk about my ideas. But what I tried to do in How Soon Is Now was kind of give a holistic, integral kind of perspective, sort of looking at the evolution of human society as a kind of like extension of biological evolution. Like I was very interested by the Gaia hypothesis and Buckminster Fuller's ideas. So I think one of the ideas that you kind of alluded to earlier was kind of, well, what interests me is like if we look at the pattern of evolution, there tends to be kind of like competition, aggression, domination, exploitation of kind of the early stages of an ecosystem. And then over time, as an ecosystem matures, it becomes more about cooperation and symbiosis. So for instance, like a tree, which is a much older organism than a person, is a masterpiece of symbiosis and cooperation. Somebody's saying my mic is overdriven. I don't know what to do about that.
I think there's a little bit of a cracking noise. If you have headphones, we can also wait for you to put them on. If not, I think we just continue as it is.
Okay. I would have just been moving around.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, evolution has the tendency to move from competition to cooperation. And in terms of human society, we're obviously still quite a young species, kind of in this kind of adolescent stage. Our economic system is still modeled on competition and domination and exploitation. If we were to think about humanity and the Earth as constituting like a giant, like planetary organism, then we might think about corporations as something like the organs of this organism. So like a media company is like the sense organs, which is like taking in raw data, and then it turns it into memes, that tells this organism how to behave, what its values are, what it should consume, and all that stuff. An energy company is like the circulation system, the money, the financial systems, like the nervous system in a way. Something like sanitation is like the liver or the kidneys, breaking down waste products, whatever. So, from my perspective, there is a possibility that as a result of crisis, we could make a more profound shift from, kind of competition and exploitation to cooperation and symbiosis as our pathway to thrive.
I fully agree with that. And if I put it in the context of the stakeholders with which we work, it's really powerful to use the metaphor of a body or an organism, because an organism cannot exist without its building blocks. Like if you don't have a heart, if you don't have a nervous system, the rest of the system is going to start decaying. So all of these different entities need to change in order for actually the organism to get healthier. And at the moment, we're on an overdrive in many ways based on the levels of unhealthiness in different topics that we've gotten to. How was maybe I want to dive a little bit deep into the cooperation idea, because I think it is a fantastic idea, but how do you achieve that? Have you delved into thinking what exactly is the approach that one can take in order for this cooperation to really be achieved, moving away from the concept that we have now?
Yeah, I mean, the only way to do it, unfortunately, would be a fundamental redesign of the financial system. I don't see any other way, because unfortunately, Wall Street, I mean, the stock market, is a human-made construct that only values financial profit. That's its only calculus. So everything else is an externality. What that means is that corporations have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to maximize financial value. And that just tends to go very much against the ecological systems, or even the social systems, the local cultures and so on. So yeah, but I don't think that within the current model of financial capitalism there's a solution. I mean, that's where I'm intrigued by the work that you're doing, and other friends who are working with corporations to sort of try to bring them into green paths or whatever. But I think that the logic of the financial system just inexorably works against that, and we kind of need a collective sort of realization that as long as we're trapped in this particular system, we're not going to be able to achieve our goals and drive ourselves to collapse and extinction.
What do you envision extinction to look like? I think we keep on going towards this end, and from a scientific perspective, we always talk about unbearable conditions from one side of the world to the other because of events becoming a lot more extreme. From your investigations, what does extinction look like?
Sure. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of us, and it would be hard to wipe us all out. It'd be like trying to get rid of an ant infestation in your house or something. But one problem is, I would say, the oxygen. So I mean, we're losing a lot of the forest and a lot of the tropical forests, which produce like 20% of the oxygen. But then you have the plankton in the ocean, which produce like 60% of our oxygen. And the plankton are also sensitive to warming and to acidification. So as acidification and warming of the oceans get worse, so the question is really what would lead to an extinction level event for humanity. Well, one would be the fact that as warming gets much worse and resources become shorter, there's going to be a lot of refugee populations on the move, and more of a likelihood of nuclear conflicts. I mean, to a certain extent, we can already see, like, certainly the Syrian war, it was a drought war. Certainly, Russia and Ukraine war to some extent is a war over resources. And, Russia is very quickly, rattling, the nuclear saber. So an outcome of the increasing tensions that are going to be exacerbated by climate change and resource depletion could very well be national wars and even nuclear wars. So that's one way. But the other big danger is the methane eruption, from under the Siberian permafrost and so on, and how, like, I think when they looked at past epochs of climate change, you could have like 6, 8, 10 degree warming in a decade or two. I mean, methane is like 30 times more potent as a heat trapping gas, but it only lasts lasts in the atmosphere for 10 years, whereas CO2 lasts for like 100 years. So the combination of those would be where I think we end up with extinction. And we also obviously see things like the collapse of the insect population, right? I think it's like 65% of insects have disappeared in the last like 30 years. And people are just starting to notice that because they, if you took, car rides in the country in the past, you would have your windshields be covered in bugs. And now people ride around in the country and there's like no bugs. There's like a huge loss of insects. And that could be, pesticides, it could be electromagnetic pollution, it could be all these things. But, that's definitely the suggestion of a major keystone form of life that's disappearing, and that's going to have effects throughout the whole ecosystem.
And as we know well from nature, it is actually the sequencing and the domino effect within our ecosystem that needs to be considered, because the insects, they might seem small and insignificant, but they're the beginning of a food chain that is essentially decaying if all of these little but meaningful building blocks disappear. There's a lot of questions in the chat.
Good question.
We'll pick them up in a second. I think it's we'll pick them up in a second because there's a lot of people, of course, interested in your perspective on things. I want to ask, something that is a bit more maybe on a personal level, because you've covered so many fascinating, in my view, topics with your books, also with your articles, with your newsletter, and a question it would be on my side, how do you pick the topics? Is it based on the urgency that you see for people to know? Is it your curiosity that drives you? Or is it the fact that you have found the lead or something that really shows you that the investigative side of you maybe needs to be kind of pushed because no one has delved into this topic so far?
Yeah, I think what happens is often, sometimes I just, want to write about something because I like it, but often I have this feeling of something gnawing at me or something wrong. Like I remember with the first book with psychedelics, I was I would go to a bookstore and be looking for a particular book. I'd be where's the book that explains why this incredibly fascinating topic is so repressed? This was back in the late 1990s, and why, modern society can't, when these were considered the wonder drugs of the 50s, why it's a whole generation totally repressed it, and the whole, so just basically what I feel that this thing is missing in the world, then ultimately I feel the need to create it. And similarly, just in the few pieces that I've just been writing about, Jewish identity and anti-Semitism in the contemporary world, it was this kind of feeling of uncertainty, uncomfortability, that something needs to be said or expressed in a way. That's been the driver. When I wrote How Soon Is Now, it took me 10 years actually. The sense was everybody, even now we see many more books like David S. Wells, The Uninhabitable Earth, and all this stuff, where they're giving you this totally negative vision of how bad things could get. But that, what I wanted to do was okay, well, let's say we really could come together to make a positive change. How would we actually do that? How would we look at our systems and structures, and how would we change consciousness? How would we change our technical support systems? How would we change our social, political, and economic systems? So that was, so usually that's what drives me, is a sense that there's this thing that's missing, and it's like a splinter in my psyche that nobody's been able to define it in a way.
Which actually is a nice leeway to one of the questions that we got from the audience, which is, what is a positive message you can say? I think in the context of the previous question that Eddie shared, the idea is you have chosen with How Soon Is Now a positive perspective on what could be done in order for us to see a fundamental shift in the way society is led and is also defining what value is. Have you been positive over the last few years, or is it something that maybe has shifted ever since you've written the book?
Well, I'm more positively, personally, in a way, I've kind of surrendered in a way, but I'm not very positive in terms of the likely outcome in the next few years. We're seeing so many danger signs, like the rising authoritarianism and fascism and all that stuff. But I think the positive message. It's also a little bit complicated. I think that people could be happier and live with less. I think like modernism and consumerism, created an ideology that happiness looks a certain way, and it requires like several houses, a lot of travel, and cars, and yachts and luxury goods. But actually, we could unwire ourselves, deprogram ourselves from that idea, and reinvent our ideals of happiness and the good life as being very connected locally with community and with people that we love, developing, exploring consciousness, expanding consciousness. In terms of Eddie's other question, do you have a hidden problem no one talks about? I don't know if it's really hidden, but I definitely feel that it's sort of consciousness and ideology that almost need to be addressed first. That part of the problem is, we have we still have a sort of materialist worldview. It's like the basic set point, and that's why for me, kind of before I could write about anything else, I had to, inquire kind of phenomenologically as to whether I believed in materialism or something more esoteric. And as I discovered kind of these more esoteric layers, it makes you more happy and more free, because you're aware that like you don't have to do everything in this one little life. Like there's other opportunities in the cosmos, and I think that can be freeing, because with the materialism, people are really very terrified of death, which is problematic. But they sort of try to shore up their insecure sense of self with material possessions. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's been I think a few years of redefining values for many, and that has been an imposed and also sometimes preferred or self-chosen kind of choice to be made. And there's been a big engagement in what we see, and I always, of course, bring it to the context of the companies that we work with. There's been this massive movement of team members that have nothing to do with sustainability, that have asked their companies for the time and space for them to take action. And I think it's because at the end, and there's also been the great resignation, where so many people left their jobs because even though maybe it was going to lead to insecurity, they wanted to be associated and assigning their time to purpose. There's also been so many communities that now have popped up, be it related to kind of more related to, be it spirituality, or related to also just connecting better to nature. And I think if you put it in the context of what this is meant for businesses, is that you all of a sudden needed to have a very comprehensive agenda on what you need to do to be a meaningful contributor to someone's life, because otherwise they just pick someone else, because there's now a lot of options that you can select, especially in the Western world, where you can find the sustainable alternative against what maybe you are associated with. I think this is an interesting question, because I think if it was one of the usual suspects in the sustainability discussion within a business, be it the chief sustainability officer or someone that is consulting companies, I would even be able to assume what they are going to respond. But I don't know how you are going to take this one. So the question is, how do you envision the role of carbon markets in decarbonization? So all of these carbon credits, like what do you think about them as a part to play on decarbonization?
I just don't know if it actually works. I mean, in the book, I looked at kind of Vandana Shiva's, I think, perspective. That the problem is that it sort of creates perverse incentives, because you're trading, kind of these carbon futures or whatever they are. It almost, she argues that it almost kind of means that more carbon will be created, because now there's like a market for it. And the other problem is that I find the accounting quite funky, right? Like, I mean, carbon credits are often, we're going to plant X number of trees to offset, the fact that we took these luxury jets around the world. I just don't know if that really works because the jet fuel is used so instantly, and the trees take so long to grow and produce that carbon. And there's also, so I'm suspicious about carbon markets. I feel this is another, and I hate, I know, and I, this is where it's really challenging, and why I also wanted to have this discussion with you, but also kind of had a little bit of fear around it. Is like, I just am not sure that we can actually deal with our environmental situation and maintain any form of the current type of capitalism. So that includes something like carbon markets, which are kind of like an attempt to maintain a sort of capitalist structure. And by saying, I think that there's value to markets and all that stuff, but probably we need something more like degrowth as a model. Which is like what Jason Hickel has been writing about from the London School of Economics. Degrowth. That obviously means that we would also need something like universal basic income, because a lot of the jobs that people have now in the careers and the industries are all focused on growth. It's considered a terrible thing that growth is slowing down globally, but actually the growth inexorably produces more ecological destruction and more carbon.
I'm on the side of where businesses actually are shifting, and I am still not hugely kind of subscribed to the degrowth idea. I find it really difficult to comprehend because it's one extreme or another. What I definitely agree, though, is that when it comes to assessing value within a financial system, we need to add missing KPIs, which are associated to the negative impact that we have on the planet. Because if this is not embedded in day-to-day assessments, then we don't actually know what value we're sitting on. Because a lot of assets that are, be it within financial institutions or within other institutions, are heavily either over-subsidized or they are overvalued because they are considered to be stable. But as you say, even if you think of what can happen if we have like all these carbon bombs that are related to methane, or be it because of the fact that ecological destruction is not allowing for certain resources to be accessible anymore because we've overconsumed and the lands are not fertile enough, which we already have in the agricultural sector, for example, extensively, where monocultures kind of kill off a whole ecosystem. There essentially we end up with a more complex set of schemes if the values are really aligned only to the financial return that ultimately is diminishing in any case, and that's where also the economic situation is as it is now. I find it really important. Sorry, please go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say that, for me, degrowth. There are things that, a lot of things that need to happen that don't happen because of the current, structure of the financial system, and a lot of things that shouldn't happen that keep happening, also because of that current structure. So, for instance, like, you're talking about unfertile lands. Like, one thing that we would need to do globally is kind of go back from industrial monoculture farming to more like small scale permaculture or organic farming. And that actually is a huge, kind of employment opportunity for, millions and millions of people who would have to be kind of retrained. The industrial land concerns would have to be broken up, and then they would have to be retrained to be small scale farmers. There's a really beautiful movie called The Biggest Little Farm, which is almost like propaganda for this idea, because these were like Hollywood, kind of producers who decided they wanted to become farmers, and they took over. You can see how messed up the land is, how it's like totally unfertile. And in 6 years, using all these techniques, the whole area comes totally back into life. All these birds, all these insects, everything comes back. So it is, nature is extremely restorative and regenerative, and we can do things like that. But, the type of logic that's embedded in, the current capitalist structure is, planned obsolescence and conspicuous consumption. So for instance, like, what would be the KPI of, like, if we were to actually figure out what it costs to make one of these devices, right? It's probably, each one of these would be worth like $10,000 or something like that, or $20,000. They would be priced out of what people could actually afford. which means that these things should actually be designed in a very different way. They should be component based. The cords shouldn't change every 2 years. The headphone jacks shouldn't change all the time. All that stuff is just done for corporate profit, and it's adding a huge burden of waste to the environment.
Yeah, the only thing that I would like to do, and that's not because we work with this stakeholder, but because I'm really in the midst of all the transformation that is happening, is that every single stakeholder, including consumers and including obviously governments, everyone has a part to play in the transformation. And I think one beautiful example of what you were saying, and I would love to double down on the design bit, is actually now the EU banned the possibility for the jacks of the laptops and of the phones to be changed. So in the coming 2 years, we're going to have to sticking to one single type, again, because of all the e-waste that is being created. But I fully agree with you that there is a lot of opportunity for kind of a transformation to happen if we are opting in for kind of a communal understanding of the benefits, because nature can actually do a lot of great work itself, as long as we kind of understand ourselves as a participant that maybe should take a pause for a second in the activities that we do. I want to ask you about design, because I think this is something I've not touched upon with my guests, except with one fantastic example, like a friend, Martin. He is the founder of Kraftblock, which is an energy storage company. We spent 1 hour really deeply diving into all of the ways in which energy can be stored and how important this is for the decarbonization of our economy, because with renewables being a decentralized energy source, they're also having the challenges sometimes of not having the traditional approach to energy storage, because it's not like oil that you just extract and then you put into some, into some facility where it's gathered, or into some container that it goes somewhere. So you need these kinds of large-scale storages. But there, the design topic was touched upon because we were discussing efficiency. From your perspective, that obviously covers design of communities, design of maybe society, organisms. Like, what do you think? Where do you think this part of the decarbonization journey of our economy has to play? Is design important? You mentioned it in the context of obviously kind of the electronic devices, but I think it can be a bit more overarching further than that.
Yeah, no, basically what I was doing at How Soon Is Now was looking at everything through the lens of design. That's Buckminster Fuller's. He was a design scientist in a way. But I think we also have to think about the design of how the design of the economy, the design of the political systems. One big problem that we're running into at the moment, I would say, is the sort of form of nation state. I was very happy by here that the EU just banned changing the jacks and all that stuff. That's the most advanced and obvious step. It should have happened many years ago, but that's great. But generally, it's the governments are just moving too slow compared to the pace of innovation and technological change. If we look at our governments, the U.S. government was designed in the 18th century at a time when things just moved so much slower. Horse and buggies or a scooter ship was the way you would get a message across the country. So we're trapped in these kind of outmoded government structures which have worked to this point, and we don't really know how to move beyond them. But it is a very, very serious issue. So that's a whole other area of design thinking, social design, how we would change things on that level.
We have an interesting question coming from Tim. Thank you, Tim Deutschmann. What do you think about introducing a full reserve monetary system, a circulation protection, and charge deposits and debts with negative interest rates? This will cause a shrinking of the amount of money and lead to negative growth and reduction of inequality.
Wait, that was fast. That was a lot.
Sorry. I'm putting it back on.
what do you think about just full reserve monetary? Full, I don't know even full reserve circulation protection and charged. Okay, I would have to unpack the statement to understand fully what he's talking about. But I mean, in my book, I got very interested in Bernard Lietaer, who was an economist who wrote a book called The Future of Money. And he argued that we needed like a global trading currency that had a demurrage or negative interest rate. So actually people would have no incentive to hoard it. They would want to keep just moving it through society, like energy or something. And similarly, I got interested in this guy, Tom Greco, who wrote a book called The End of Money and the Future of Civilization. And his idea was local exchange trading systems, or LETS. So you could have like a group of localized businesses and service providers who create their own form of mutual credit. And then they can issue loans, zero interest loans, if they want another business to be in the neighborhood or whatever. So that would be, I guess, a form of like stakeholder capitalism at a local level.
Mm-hmm. Interesting ideas, and I'll follow up with you to gather all the resources so we can maybe share with anyone that is interested. We have a lot of really fascinating questions. I think you provoked a lot of people with the growth, degrowth topic. I think I'll maybe first I think I will just pick up some of the questions that I see. So one that is related to our topics: companies will only change if their changes will be measurable. What kind of products do we need now that could help them measure that change? I maybe let you start, and then I'm happy to fill in, given this is at the end of the day the domain of planning.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally your domain, much more than mine. Let's see. Well, their changes are measurable. What kind of products we now that could help them to measure that change? Yeah, I don't really have a great answer for that. So I'm curious what you got.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my view. So as we always explain, and I connecting it to the topics that we're discussing here, our economic model at the moment is not the reflection of the truth behind value. And what this means is that if you look at KPIs like GDP, we've been for the last 12 years going down with our GDP. And the reason for this is we're missing part of the assessment toolkit in order to understand what is the cost of us taking certain actions that maybe are damaging to the planet, to other social and governance structures. With this in mind, at least from our perspective, like we've developed the KPI system and also the measurement system, we, in order to stay unbiased, are not using our own KPIs, but rather KPIs that are well understood and kind of becoming part of the reporting standards for businesses related to CO2, related to kind of decarbonization goals. And with this in mind, we offer a view of the status quo against the actual value of the what the company has maybe against money, where you then can see in truth, do you really sit on that many assets if they are at 70% risk of either disappearing or becoming part of the protected lands? I would highly recommend for anyone that is interested in this topic to explore the concept of carbon bubble, which essentially explains the idea behind the overvaluation of a lot of financial assets that are based on unsustainable practices, only with the choice that was made today at the COP15, by protecting 1/3 of the planet, that already reconfirms like even more value that is overvalued, because it is probably sitting in lands that now are not going to be allowed to be explored for oil and gas and other types of fossil fuels that obviously at scale lead to negative repercussions for the health of the planet. So what are the ways, just to kind of sum up, the kinds of products is carbon accounting systems, not necessarily only Plan A, but other ones as well, as long as they're scientifically sound, that's valid. Other types of engagements are also related to education. I keep on talking about education, and I feel like until we don't understand the fundamental dependency between the building blocks of our ecosystem, we're not going to understand like how challenging it has been for for our system to be balanced, and that's why we're seeing all these negative repercussions. And by learning what sustainable practices mean, we also stand the chance of starting to take sustainable actions. And finally, it's about what Daniel was saying in the beginning, and also that is deeply embedded in the concept behind how soon is now, and that's collaboration. There is a deep need for all stakeholders to work together, and that by itself, in my opinion, is a product. We need to be able to enable corporates to work together with their suppliers, with their clients, with governments, to really align around the same targets, because at the moment it's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the big, I guess, questions or issues, it feels like a lot of the kind of mainstream sort of, corporate and billionaire kind of rhetoric around, the green economy and net zero and all that stuff, is basically kind of still putting out this idea that through technology, people are going to be able to maintain, more or less their current lifestyles. I don't personally think that that's the case. And I think actually we're already seeing, I mean, I'm living in New York City right now. It's like everything is just skyrocketed in price. And we're also seeing, supply chains beginning to break down, like things that you just get like that. Now take like 4 to 6 months or something. I think that's just a harbinger of where things are going. But out of necessity, out of the necessity of the energy crunch, out of the resource crunch, and so on. But what's so frustrating is that society is not engaged in an authentic dialogue around these deeper transformations that are happening. I mean, I was recently at this conference in Paris, and this guy Reza spoke. He's working with the Rand Corporation, and or he has been, and he's developing a fund where they're estimating that within like 20 years, there's going to be large-scale migrations of people from the global south into areas like Canada and the northeast inland of the United States. So they're trying to, in advance, buy up kind of real estate in those regions as a sort of smart capitalist business move, which I find super spooky and kind of like, but he himself believes that, we might see 2 to 3 billion people perish in the next like 20 or 30 years as things get, hairy. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that, and this is why I wrote How Soon Is Now. I don't think that has to happen, but the only way for that not to happen would be a tremendously new level of authentic dialogue. And it's very difficult for that to happen because everybody's livelihoods, except for a few weirdos like myself, are very much like dependent on these like financial webs and these company webs and so on. Yeah.
I think there's a lot in a typical crisis response way. There's, I think, a pattern that is being followed also in this particular one, where we are now still in the stage where there's a lot of chaos, a lot of unclarity on how do we align response. And ultimately, as unfortunately we see some more negative repercussions, because I always try to explain to people from all the science of climate change that I know about, that we're already past a certain point where we should expect that things are ever going to get back to normal. We should assume that certain lands, if we don't overwork ourselves to replenish these lands, are gone, and they're not going to be available for fertile activities or for or we'll need to make the massive investments for that to happen. And obviously society will be impacted in one way or another, because in the same way that the climate change crisis has been unfolding over decades, so will the response to it take also some time until the way we are being, the way the natural world responds to our good doing is also visible. So I think I don't necessarily subscribe to any like ideas like the 2-3 billion. I also am no one to kind of criticize any response by a company that I don't necessarily am familiar with. I only know the companies that we work with, and we kind of make a careful choice of who we work with to make sure that there's really a clear commitment towards achieving net zero, rather than simply being there with the headlines. But I do understand when there's a concern, and probably this leads me to a really important topic about communication. I'm sure that Daniel, like you, as someone that is a wordsmith, you're deeply involved in telling people also fact-based, but also not always fact-based, but telling stories that are captivating. You have been maybe fascinated, or at least have been observing the issue of greenwashing in your own time, or maybe even as part of your investigations. I was last week on a call with one of the biggest fashion companies in the world, and the lady on the phone was really blunt, and she said, honestly, like, our company is now putting like 30% of its revenues in decarbonization, and we're increasing this further and further, and we're still being told that we're greenwashing, and we don't know how to shake this off. What is in your view the story related to greenwashing that will maybe change people's minds? How does a company regain the confidence and the trust of its clients or people that observe on the outside? How do you get back in the good books? Even you might be trying a lot, but then you're not being perceived as such because of historical residue.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess it would just be trying to communicate very authentically. Maybe having open, long open calls with stakeholders, with investors, with the public. I think people have to sort of feel the heart, in a way, because, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of rhetoric that sounds great. But it doesn't necessarily lead anywhere, or it hasn't, certainly led anywhere in many cases up to this point. And yeah, when you talked about COP15 and this fantastic idea, they're going to protect all these lands, but look at the previous COPs and all of the agreements, the great words and fine-sounding rhetoric that everybody had, but then those agreements were not honored at all. So. There's a reason that at this point, the public is, I think, largely cynical, about companies and governments and, how what they say and what they do go together. And also they see, these hundreds, thousands of private jets, going to Davos by people who are, making pious comments about the need for environmental protection. And they naturally get the message that those people, those private jets, are not really planning to stop flying around in those private jets. So if there's going to be, or eating their, steak and their caviar and all that stuff. So if anybody's going to be paying the price for that, those new ecological initiatives, it's going to be everybody else. So for all these reasons, people are very, very suspicious and very cynical about, pretty much anything that governments or corporations say environmentally at this point. And then you also have a lot of, climate denying stuff still going on, which is probably, coming from disinformation from, the fossil fuel industries who spent, hundreds of millions, if not billions, on, targeted messaging, working with, Russians and all that stuff, like Putin, to destabilize and create like disinformation and so on. So yeah, it's a mess. So the best thing you could probably do would be, truly authentic, no holds barred communication. But generally, it doesn't work in our society because people have secrets to hide.
Yeah, I think this is a super important conversation that I'm sure next year will unfold, because I find it difficult to believe that the transformation of our economy will happen if this distrust continues, because there is a need for the authenticity of the messages. There's a need for evidence as well. And whenever someone says that they're going to do something, that should be based on facts. And I think we have quite a big part to play, we as Plan A, of course, on enabling people to ask the right questions, but also to not create a dynamic where we continue bashing any effort that is being made about sustainability, because let's be honest, there's a lot of companies out there that need to decarbonize. be it in the fashion industry, be it in the automotive, be it in the finance industry, be it in furniture making or anything like that is heavily reliant on these building blocks like logistics, production in facilities that are not also always coming from renewable sources. But you also, to be able to achieve that, you need access to your suppliers and to change their minds and so on. And I think it would take some people kind of believing. The engagement is there when also the effort is being put. And I find it really exciting to think that it is possible to see change. And I don't know, like, are you fully do you believe that change is possible? I mean, of course, like 10 years ago, definitely, but because I don't know, I believe in that. That's why I give all my efforts on daily basis.
Well, change is inevitable. Things are changing rapidly and radically. We've gone way past the carrying capacity of the planet, and we're changing, the ecosystems upon which we depend in a negative direction continually. So yeah, I mean, change is definitely happening. Do I think positive change can? By the way, I totally respect what you're doing, and I think that you're doing the right thing, to be leading within business this charge. And I think your newsletter is a great source of, true information. And I totally get what you're doing. I just have another place in the, kind of ecosystem of ideas, which is kind of just to be a, I don't know what, an irritant, I guess, like a gadfly or something, because it's like,
yeah.
So I totally appreciate, what you're doing, and trying to reform these systems from within these systems. That has to be done. I've tried that, at previous times, and if somebody offered me a contract to do that again, I would probably try in some way also. In reality, though, I think that it's basically what I wrote in How Soon Is Now. I can see paths to avoiding civilizational collapse and billions of people dying, but I don't see it happening in any way that perpetuates these current capitalist structures. In a way, there are things that need to be done which we could do, but it would require something like a awakening of consciousness, a realization that we've radically overshot our capacities, and then doing things like retraining people to become organic gardeners and farmers. Aquaculture is also very powerful. If we had massive kelp farming in the oceans, it would leach out the excess CO2 from the oceans, which could reverse acidification. Biochar, systemic regenerative technologies. My friend who has what's it called again? Those sort of sustainable villages. There are lots of things that we could kind of do at scale. The problem is they don't fit into the calculus of the financial system. Where companies need to, like a fashion company, they have to convince people to buy something new every year. Like a new dress or a new skirt or something. So that means that every year they have to have like all these people making the stuff and the stuff being shifted around the world. It's just clearly not sustainable. It's not ecologically. You could teach people to sew, but then you're out of business as a fashion company. I
don't think anyone has all people on this planet have a talent for sewing, so probably we'll miss some talent.
That's actually not the case. People used to, make their own clothes, and they still do in indigenous cultures. A lot of what capitalism has done is taking things that people used to do for themselves and alienating it from them and then selling it back to them. People used to make their own clothes. They used to drink water out of streams. Now they get, bottled water. People used to educate their own kids. Now they send their kids to private schools. People used to, tell stories with each other around the fire. Now they watch Netflix. I
think it's a little bit of a, I do understand where you're coming from, but I do still feel that there's a reason why we've gotten where we are, and people doubling down on some talents that they have is also, we can then open up the discussion, is everyone working to expand on their talents and scale their potential? that is for another episode, because I think that there's also an opportunity there for society to improve. But I do feel like there's a reason why we have now companies for certain things, because I can tell you that, there's a few topics that I'm totally okay for someone else to take care. I'm being mindful of time, because I think with you, we can always sit and chat for a long time. And that's because you have fascinating ideas. And also, I think a lot of thought-provoking kind of contemplations that are there to be considered.
Yeah, just to answer what you just said. I mean, I'm not against anything that's happening. I'm not against capitalism or technology. I mean, as I said, I've surrendered, in ways, but I do think it's helpful for us always to go back and really think through, how we got into this circumstance, and recognize how the sort of functioning of a sort of capitalist system works, which is to kind of alienate us from our own nature, and then to sell us back things that we used to do organically. And I'm not saying that, I don't want to make my own clothes either, I don't want to learn to sew at this point, but I mean, I think it's important for us to understand the historical kind of determinism, of the system, because now as we're reaching the end of that system, we're going to have to turn some of that around. So for instance, like in a modernist idea was that, the country is a boring place. Everybody's going to move to the city. They'll become like Uber drivers, or marketing and all that stuff. Okay, you got to call. We can
Yeah,
stop right
but
now.
thank you so much, Daniel. This is always really fascinating to be with you. Well, wishing you wonderful holidays, and to everyone that was listening, thank you for the engaging questions. We'll be continuing